In the final video in this series, we're going to go over load balancers and DNS. Now, as we all know, load balancers are super important because it allows your endpoint to be able to get out to the internet, and DNS kind of does the same thing. It allows you to convert an IP address to a host name. So they go pretty well together. Let's take a look at our options in AWS. So first things first, underneath the search bar, I'm actually going to type in EC2. And the reason why is because load balancers are under EC2 in AWS. So if I scroll down here, you'll see here that I have load balancers. I can click Create Load Balancer. And then as you can see, we have a few different options. We have an application load balancer, a network load balancer, and a gateway load balancer. So an application load balancer is, I feel like that's what a lot of people typically use because you're usually putting a load balancer in front of an application. So, via HTTP, HTTPS, something that's front facing. The network load balancer is essentially for if you need any type of like TLS, offloading, certificate deployment, support for UDP, static IP addresses for your applications. And then a gateway load balancer is when you need to deploy a bunch of third-party appliances. So an appliance, for example, could be one of the Barracuda appliances in AWS or a Cisco appliance or something like that. So in our case, we'll choose application load balancer and we'll click create, and then we'll go ahead and we'll give this a name. Packet pushers LB. We could choose if we want it to be internet facing or internal. So for example, internet facing would be like some type of website, some type of web front end, and then internal would maybe be a bunch of back end applications. We could choose IP address, so either we want IPv4 or IPv4 and IPv6. Network mapping, so we can choose what VPC we want and then what availability zones we want. So, for example, if we want it to be highly available, we could do it just like that. And then we could choose our security groups, listeners and routing. So that's going to be, for example, let's say you want your load balancer to listen on port 80. Or maybe you want, another one, so you want HTTPS as well. And we're going to talk about target groups in just a second, don't worry. Then next you have your secure listener. So for any type of certificates, SSL, TLS, etc. Some add-on options, so the global accelerator to get static IP addresses, tags, and then finally the summary here. So you can go ahead and you can click Create Load Balancer. Now, as you can see, you need a target group. Now, what is a target group? Let's go ahead and click on that. So a target group can be a few things. Essentially, it's just a group of instances or IP addresses. You can also use Lambda functions. So let's just go with instances because that's easy, right? An EC2 instance. Now let's say you have 3 EC2 instances in some type of high availability auto scaling style group, and your web front-end application is running on all of those instances. Well, this target group will essentially just literally group the EC2 instances together for your load balancer. That way, if one of the nodes goes down, you still have 2 working perfectly fine. And then you have IP addresses, so if you want to do the same thing for IPs, for Lambda functions, and then an application load balancer option here. Now you can give this a name, packet pushers, target group, what port you want, so we'll do port 80 is fine, what protocol you want, so we'll go with just HTTP1, any type of health check, so the health checks are going to be around where's your application running or a specific path. And then we can go ahead and we can click next. Now as you can see, we do need some instances here if we want, but we can just, go ahead and click create. Now, of course, this isn't actually going to really do much because at the end of the day, we don't have any instances running. But as you can see, we do have a target group. So now if we go back to our load balancers and we go through these options again, let's do that really quick. We can now choose our target group here, and then we can click create load balancer. Now, our load balancer is officially created. And that's kind of, I don't know, maybe step 1 if you want to call it step 1. Now, how about if we want to actually be able to reach this load balancer because we have a bunch of websites or web front ends running here? Well, this is kind of confusing to remember, right? And as we all know, DNS is, supposed to essentially make things a little bit easier to remember. Instead of remembering a bunch of IP addresses, in this case, we don't want to remember a bunch of DNS names that look like this. So let's go ahead and set up our DNS name in Route 53. So in the search bar, I'm going to type in Route 53. We're going to click on Route 53. And then at this point, I'm going to go to hosted zones. Now, as you can see, I have a hosted zone here. So we'll go ahead and we'll click on this domain. And then what we'll do is we'll click create record. Now at this point, this is pretty much like setting up any other type of DNS, except it's just done via AWS. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to give this a record name. We're going to go to our record type, and we're going to choose a CNAME. That's because we need an alias to point to, you guessed it, our load balancer. So now, instead of remembering this, we're going to simply have to remember packet.simplyandengineer.com. You can choose your TTL, your routing policy, and as you can see, we have our record right here. It's pointing to our load balancer, and here's our record name. And that's how you can get started with load balancers and Route 53 inside of AWS.